Karen laughs at trans teen in school, then learns his father owns the district. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The classroom was buzzing with energy as students settled into their seats, exchanging whispers and laughter. It was just another day at Maplewood High, except for the fact that Logan, a quiet yet determined trans teen, had finally found the courage to wear the necklace his father had gifted him on his birthday. It wasn't just any necklace, it bore a small engraved pendant with his initials, a symbol of his identity, his strength, and the love and support of his family. Karen Daniels, the school's notoriously nosy and judgmental substitute teacher, glanced around the room, her eyes landing on Logan. A sneer tugged at the corners of her lips as she strode toward him. Well, she drawled, her voice loud enough for the entire class to hear. What do we have here? Logan, is it? Or should I say, something else? The room fell silent. Logan's stomach clenched as a few students snickered, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. He had dealt with microaggressions before, but never this blatantly, especially not from a teacher. Karen crossed her arms. I've been teaching here long enough to know that students should adhere to dress codes and appropriate gender expressions. This, she gestured toward his necklace, her lips curling in distaste, is just confusing for everyone. Logan's face heated up, but he kept his composure. It's just a necklace, he said calmly, gripping the pendant between his fingers. It means a lot to me, Karen scoffed. Oh please, we all know what this is really about. If you're trying to play pretend, fine, but don't expect the rest of us to go along with it. Gasps rippled through the room. A few students whispered in disbelief, while others watched Logan, waiting for his reaction. I'm not pretending, Logan said, his voice steady despite the lump forming in his throat. This is who I am. Karen let out a sharp laugh. Oh, sweetie, I've been around long enough to know that kids like you are just looking for attention. Honestly, I feel bad for your parents. If they even know about this little phase. That was the final straw. Before Logan could respond, a voice rang out from the doorway. Excuse me, but what did you just say to my son? A stunned silence fell over the room as all heads turned. Standing at the door was none other than Dr. Mitchell Hayes, the superintendent of the entire school district. Karen's face paled. Logan exhaled in relief. His father had arrived, and he was not happy. Dr. Mitchell Hayes strode into the classroom with an air of authority that made even the most defiant students sit up a little straighter. His sharp blue eyes locked onto Karen, scanning her with a mixture of disappointment and anger. Logan had never seen his father look quite this furious before. Karen quickly composed herself, forcing a thin smile. Dr. Hayes, what a surprise. I was just having a conversation with one of the students. Is that what you call it? Dr. Hayes' voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. He turned to Logan, his gaze softening. Are you okay, son? Logan nodded, though he could still feel his heart pounding in his chest. Karen chuckled nervously. Oh, Dr. Hayes, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was simply trying to encourage a, more traditional environment in the classroom. You know how important it is to maintain structure. Dr. Hayes didn't budge. So, by structure, you mean publicly humiliating a student in front of his peers? Karen's mouth opened and closed as she fumbled for a response. One of Logan's classmates, a girl named Sophia, raised her hand tentatively. Sir, with all due respect, she wasn't just humiliating him. She was, Sophia hesitated before finishing, being really transphobic? A few other students murmured in agreement. Dr. Hayes let out a slow breath, his jaw tightening. He turned back to Karen. I'd like to hear exactly what you said to my son. Karen's confidence wavered. Well, I just pointed out that it can be confusing when students, when he chooses to. She gestured vaguely in Logan's direction, as if grasping for a way to make herself sound reasonable. Look, I've been teaching for years. I know that sometimes kids experiment. It's just a phase, and I was trying to... Dr. Hayes cut her off. Let me make something very clear to you, Ms. Daniels. His voice was controlled but cold. This school is a place of learning. A place where students should feel safe, not ridiculed by the very people who are supposed to be educating and guiding them. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Dr. Hayes wasn't finished. You have no right to question my son's identity. No right to police how he expresses himself. And certainly no right to bring your personal biases into a classroom full of students who deserve better. The room was silent. Karen looked around as if hoping for someone to come to her defense, but the students remained quiet, watching with wide eyes. Dr. Hayes straightened his posture. Effective immediately, you are suspended while we investigate this incident. And if I find out that you've treated any other student like this, you can consider your career in this district over. Karen's face turned beet red. You can't just? Oh, I can, Dr. Hayes said. I own this district. The weight of his words sank in, and Karen stumbled back slightly, gripping the edge of a desk for support. Logan, still clutching his pendant, felt a surge of pride. His father had always been a strong advocate for students, but seeing him stand up for him, for who he was, felt different. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line as she realized she had no way out of this. She turned her gaze to Logan, as if expecting some sort of sympathy. But Logan just looked her in the eye and said, "It's not a phase." And for the first time, Karen had nothing to say. Karen sat frozen in place, her face drained of all color. The weight of Dr. Hayes' words hung in the air like a thundercloud, heavy and inescapable. Around the room, students exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Some of them had been on the receiving end of Karen's remarks before, maybe not as directly as Logan, but they had felt it. The microaggressions, the judgmental stares, the passive-aggressive comments about tradition and normalcy. And now, she was finally facing consequences. Logan still couldn't believe what had just happened. His father had always been firm but diplomatic, never one to cause a scene. But today, he had shown up for him in a way he hadn't expected. A warmth spread through Logan's chest. This was more than just a defense, it was a declaration. Karen's voice finally broke through the silence, weak and shaky. Dr. Hayes, perhaps I was a bit harsh. I didn't mean any harm. I was simply trying to enforce standards in my classroom. If I overstepped, then I sincerely apologize. Dr. Hayes didn't buy it. Apologies don't erase damage, Ms. Daniels. And I highly doubt this is the first time you've made a student feel unwelcome in your class. Karen's mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. Logan stood up, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. It wasn't, he said. His voice was steady, stronger than he thought it would be. You've been doing this for months. Ever since I transitioned, you've treated me differently. You never say my name unless you have to. You use the wrong pronouns all the time and call it an honest mistake. You make jokes about confusion and identity crises. And you act like I'm the problem when all I'm doing is existing. A few students nodded in agreement. Some looked away, uncomfortable but knowing Logan was right. Karen's expression twisted into something unreadable, whether it was regret, anger, or sheer panic, Logan wasn't sure. Dr. Hayes turned back to her, his voice cold. I don't tolerate discrimination in my district. The teachers who work under me are supposed to foster safe learning environments, not make students feel ashamed of who they are. Karen sat straighter, attempting to regain some control. Dr. Hayes, please, let's not be hasty. I'm willing to undergo training, perhaps sensitivity courses. Dr. Hayes cut her off. Sensitivity training isn't enough to fix what's already broken. You're an educator, Ms. Daniels. You should have known better before humiliating my son in front of his peers. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She seemed to realize that no amount of bargaining would save her now. Logan glanced around at his classmates, then back at his father. This was really happening. He was being heard. Then, something unexpected happened. Sophia, the girl who had spoken up earlier, took a step forward. Dr. Hayes, she said hesitantly, I think we all want to be in a school where teachers respect us, where we don't have to worry about being shamed for who we are. She looked at Logan, then back at their principal. Ms. Daniels made me feel like I had to stay quiet when I saw her treat Logan like this. I don't want to stay quiet anymore. Another student spoke up. Neither do I. And another. Me neither. One by one, Logan's classmates found their voices. Dr. Hayes listened intently, his expression unreadable, but Logan could tell this moment meant something to him. He wasn't just fighting for him, he was fighting for all of them. Karen, meanwhile, looked absolutely miserable, her face pale as she listened to the growing chorus of students calling her out. Finally, Dr. Hayes turned to her one last time. Your suspension is effective immediately. You'll be contacted regarding next steps. In the meantime, I suggest you take a hard look at how you've been treating the students in your care. Karen exhaled sharply, standing up and smoothing her skirt as if that would somehow restore her dignity. She didn't look at Logan as she walked past him, her heels clicking against the floor as she hurried out of the classroom. The room was silent for a moment before Sophia turned to Logan with a small, supportive smile. That was incredible. Logan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He wasn't used to feeling safe at school, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone. Dr. Hayes placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You okay? Logan nodded, feeling something he hadn't expected, hope. Logan took a deep breath, the weight of the moment finally settling in. 4 months, he had endured Karen's passive-aggressive remarks, the way she barely acknowledged his existence unless she was correcting him or making an unnecessary comment about his identity. And now, she was finally gone. A part of him had expected to feel triumphant, but instead he just felt relieved. Dr. Hayes turned to the class, scanning the faces of Logan's peers. This school is supposed to be a place where all students feel safe, respected, and empowered to learn. If any of you have ever felt otherwise, whether because of a teacher, another student, or anyone else, you need to know that we take this seriously. My door is always open, and no one should ever feel like they have to hide who they are. A few students nodded, and Logan noticed a subtle shift in the room. Some of his classmates who had previously ignored the way Karen treated him now looked thoughtful, even guilty. Others, like Sophia, had always known it was wrong but hadn't known how to stand up against it. It was strange to see them all coming together now, but it meant something. It meant that this was bigger than just him. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but no one immediately moved. There was an unspoken understanding that something had shifted in their school, that maybe, just maybe, things would start to change. Sophia turned to Logan. Hey, you okay? She asked softly. He nodded, but she must have seen something in his expression because she added, you know, if you ever want to talk or just, I don't know, vent about how exhausting this school can be, I'm here. Logan smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Thanks, Sophia. That means a lot. As students began to file out, Dr. Hayes stayed back, watching his son carefully. You handled yourself well today, he said after a moment. Logan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I just said what I had to. Dr. Hayes nodded. And that's important. Standing up for yourself isn't always easy, especially when the person in power is the one making you feel small. For a moment, Logan hesitated, then asked, Did you always plan on stepping in? His father gave him a knowing look. I wanted to see if you'd speak up for yourself first. And you did. But no matter what, Logan, I was never going to let her get away with treating you like that. Logan's throat tightened. He'd spent so long feeling like he had to fight these battles on his own. Knowing his father had been ready to support him, no matter what, made a difference. Thanks, Dad, he said quietly. Dr. Hayes squeezed his shoulder. Anytime. By lunchtime, the news of what had happened spread throughout the school. Logan could feel the stares as he walked through the halls, whispers following him. Some of the murmurs were supportive, things like, Did you hear what happened to Ms. Daniels? And it's about time someone called her out. But there were also others. She got suspended over a joke, someone muttered as he passed. That's so unfair. People are so sensitive these days, another said. Logan clenched his jaw but kept walking. He had expected this. Not everyone was going to be on his side, and that was okay. He wasn't doing this for their approval. At lunch, he sat with Sophia and a few other classmates who had stood up for him earlier. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to keep his head down or make himself smaller. You're kind of a legend now, Sophia said with a smirk as she took a bite of her sandwich. Logan rolled his eyes. I really don't want to be. Well, too bad, she teased. People are actually talking about what happened. And yeah, some of them are saying dumb stuff, but a lot of people are realizing how messed up it was that she got away with treating you like that for so long. One of the other students, a girl named Emma, nodded. My little sister had Ms. Daniels last year. She always said she felt weird in her class, like she couldn't fully be herself. Hearing what you went through makes a lot of sense. Logan frowned. I hate that she made so many people feel that way. But now she can't, Sophia pointed out. Because you spoke up. That thought stayed with Logan for the rest of the day. He hadn't just stood up for himself, he had helped change things for other students too. Later that afternoon, Dr. Hayes called a meeting with the school staff. Logan wasn't there to witness it, but he could imagine the tension in the room as his father addressed the faculty. I want to make something very clear, Dr. Hayes said, his voice firm. What happened in Ms. Daniels' classroom is not an isolated incident. And if we are truly committed to creating an inclusive environment for our students, then we need to take a hard look at how we support them, or how we fail to. Some teachers nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. Dr. Hayes continued, going forward, we will be implementing stricter policies regarding discrimination in the classroom. This includes mandatory training for all staff members and an open forum where students can safely report any concerns. A teacher raised their hand hesitantly. Dr. Hayes, some parents may push back against these changes. Dr. Hayes met their gaze without hesitation. Then they will have to take it up with me. Back at home, Logan sat on the couch, exhausted but lighter than he had felt in a long time. His dad sat next to him, scrolling through his emails. You made a difference today, Dr. Hayes said. Logan shrugged. I just told the truth. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do. Logan let those words settle, realizing that, for the first time in a long time, he actually believed them. The following day, Logan walked into school with a newfound confidence. The weight that had been pressing on his chest for so long had lifted, if only slightly. He wasn't naive. He knew that not everyone would suddenly change their attitudes overnight. But at least now, they knew he wouldn't stay silent. He wasn't going to shrink himself to make others comfortable. As he made his way to his locker, he noticed a few lingering stares. Some students quickly averted their gazes when he looked back, while others whispered to their friends. Logan ignored them, focusing instead on getting through the day. Sophia caught up with him as he was gathering his books. So, how does it feel to be the most talked about person in school? She teased. He groaned. I'd rather not be. Well, too bad, she said with a grin. People actually care about what happened. I heard some teachers talking about it in the hallway earlier, and they seemed pretty supportive. That was a relief at least. The faculty had always been hit or miss when it came to these kinds of issues. Some of them genuinely cared, while others just went through the motions to avoid controversy. As the day went on, Logan noticed something else. A shift, however subtle, in the way some people interacted with him. A few students who had never spoken to him before offered small smiles in passing. Others who had been indifferent to him in the past now seemed more aware of their words, more conscious of the way they spoke around him. Even the teachers seemed different. His history teacher, who had never once acknowledged the microaggressions Logan faced in class, made an effort to address the importance of inclusivity in their lesson. His math teacher asked if he was doing okay, something she had never done before. It wasn't a perfect transformation, but it was something. At lunch, Logan sat with Sophia and Emma again. They were soon joined by a few other students, including Ben, a quiet boy who had always kept to himself. I just wanted to say, what you did was really brave, Ben said hesitantly. I'm not out, but I've always been scared that if I was, people would treat me the way they treated you. Logan's heart clenched. He had never really considered how many others might have been struggling in silence, afraid to be themselves. You don't have to be out until you're ready, Logan said gently. But when you are, you won't be alone. Ben smiled, relief evident in his eyes. Thanks. The rest of lunch passed in a blur of conversations, laughter, and a sense of community that Logan hadn't felt before. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't just standing up for himself, he was standing up for people like Ben, for anyone who had ever felt out of place or unsafe just for existing. When the final bell rang, Logan gathered his things and started toward the exit. Just as he reached the front doors, he heard a voice call out to him. "Logan!" He turned to see Dr. Hayes approaching, a proud smile on his face. "I wanted to check in. How was today?" Logan thought about it for a moment before answering. "Better." His father nodded. "Good. Change doesn't happen overnight, but you've already started something important." Logan exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. "Yeah, I think I have." Over the next few days, the atmosphere at school continued to shift. Though there were still whispers and stares, Logan could feel a distinct change in how people interacted with him. The overt cruelty that had once been so common seemed to have diminished. Whether it was out of fear of consequences or genuine reflection, he wasn't sure. Either way, it was a step in the right direction. Even Karen, who had once been so vocal in her ridicule, seemed to be keeping her distance. She no longer threw smug remarks at him in the hallways or laughed behind his back with her clique. He caught her watching him a few times, her expression unreadable. It was strange, almost unsettling, but he chose not to dwell on it. What truly surprised him, though, was how many students started opening up to him. Ben wasn't the only one who had been watching from the sidelines, too afraid to speak. By the end of the week, at least 3 other students had approached Logan in private, confessing that they were either questioning their identities or had been afraid to come out due to the hostility at school. Sophia, ever the optimist, was thrilled. "See? I told you. People just needed someone to go first." "It's not that simple," Logan said, shaking his head. "This school is still full of people who think like Karen. They're just keeping quiet for now." "For now," Sophia emphasized. "That's the point. You're showing people that they don't get to act like that without consequences. You're making it safer for people like Ben." Logan wanted to believe that. He really did. At home, things had settled into a new normal. Dr. Hayes had been receiving calls from various school board members, some offering their support and others tiptoeing around the situation, clearly trying to assess whether this would become a public scandal. Logan had overheard his father speaking firmly on more than one occasion, making it clear that the district needed to do better. It felt strange knowing that his dad, his quiet, methodical father, was fighting this battle on his behalf. Logan had always assumed he would have to handle these things alone. Having someone in his corner, especially someone with power, was a foreign but welcome feeling. That Friday, an unexpected email popped up in Logan's inbox. It was from Dr. Phillips, the school principal, requesting a meeting with him and his father. Logan's stomach twisted in knots. Was this a good thing? A bad thing? When he told his father about it, Dr. Hayes simply nodded. "We'll go together." That Monday, they sat across from Dr. Phillips in his office. The principal folded his hands on his desk, his expression carefully neutral. "Logan," he began, "I want to start by saying that what happened last week was unacceptable. The district has been reviewing our policies on student safety and inclusivity, and we acknowledge that there's room for improvement." Logan blinked. He hadn't expected them to actually admit fault. As part of this initiative, we'll be implementing mandatory training for staff and student workshops on respect and inclusivity, Dr. Phillips continued. Additionally, we're setting up a student-led diversity council. We'd like to invite you to be a founding member. Logan sat in stunned silence. He glanced at his father, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. Finally, Logan found his voice. "I'd be interested in that." Dr. Phillips smiled. "Good. We want to make sure that students like you feel safe and heard." It was far from a perfect solution, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Logan felt like maybe, just maybe, things were changing for the better. As the weeks passed, Logan's involvement in the Diversity Council grew. At first, it was just a handful of students, most of whom had already been allies or members of the LGBTQ+ community. But as word spread, more people began attending, including those who had never thought much about these issues before. The meetings became a space for open discussions, education, and even personal stories from students who had faced discrimination. One of the most surprising attendees was Karen. She showed up at the third meeting, standing awkwardly at the door as if unsure whether she should enter. Logan noticed her immediately but chose to say nothing, waiting to see what she would do. After a few moments of hesitation, she stepped inside and quietly took a seat at the back of the room. Sophia, who had been in the middle of explaining a proposal for an inclusivity event, paused just slightly before continuing. The meeting went on as usual, and Karen never spoke. She simply listened. When the meeting ended, she lingered as the others filed out. Logan, still packing up his things, finally looked up and met her gaze. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Karen bit her lip, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. I wanted to see what this was about," she admitted. "I don't know if I guess I just," she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I messed up." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, you did." Her eyes flickered with something. Shame, maybe. "I didn't really think about what I was saying." "I mean, I did, but I didn't think it mattered." She looked away. "I was an idiot." Logan crossed his arms. "So why are you here now?" Karen hesitated, then sighed. "Because I don't want to be that person anymore." For a long moment, Logan just stared at her. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to think that people could change. But he wasn't sure if he was ready to forgive her just yet. "That's not up to me," he finally said. "If you want to change, you have to do the work." Karen nodded, looking down at the floor. "I know." She turned to leave but stopped at the door. "For what it's worth," she added, "I'm sorry." Logan didn't respond. He wasn't sure if he was ready to accept her apology, but he appreciated that she had said it. As she walked out, Sophia appeared beside him. "Well, that was unexpected." Logan let out a small, dry laugh. "Yeah, it was." "Do you believe her?" she asked. "I don't know," Logan admitted. "But I guess we'll see." And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel a little hope. The days that followed were a strange mix of tension and curiosity. Karen continued to show up at the Diversity Council meetings, sitting quietly at first, then gradually contributing. She didn't try to dominate the conversation or defend herself. Instead, she listened, really listened, to the experiences of others. Some students were skeptical, and rightfully so. They weren't ready to forgive her just because she suddenly decided she wanted to be better. Logan himself wasn't sure how he felt about it. But over time, something about her presence started to feel less like an intrusion and more like an effort. One afternoon, after a particularly intense meeting where a student had shared a painful experience of being outed by their own family, Karen lingered once again. Logan was packing up when she approached, hands nervously wringing together. "I wanted to ask you something," she said, hesitating slightly. Logan sighed, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "What?" Karen swallowed. "How did you know?" "About yourself, I mean." Logan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Like, when did you know you were trans?" Logan studied her for a moment, trying to figure out where this was coming from. He wasn't sure if she was genuinely curious or just trying to understand him better. Either way, he decided to answer honestly. "I guess I always knew in a way," he said. "I just didn't have the words for it when I was younger. I knew I wasn't comfortable being called a girl. I knew that whenever someone used my birth name, it felt wrong. But it took a long time for me to put everything together." Karen nodded, absorbing his words. "And your family? They were okay with it?" Logan exhaled. "My dad was. My mom needed time. It wasn't easy, but eventually she came around." Karen bit her lip, nodding slowly. "That's lucky." There was something in her voice that made Logan pause. "Karen," he said carefully, "why are you asking me this?" She hesitated, then shook her head quickly. "No reason. I was just curious." But Logan didn't believe her. Something had changed in Karen, and he didn't think it was just guilt. As he watched her walk away, he realized there was more to her story than he had ever considered. And for the first time, he wondered if Karen's cruelty had been more about herself than it ever was about him. Karen continued attending the Diversity Council meetings, and while some students remained wary of her presence, others began to accept that she might actually be trying to change. Logan, however, remained skeptical. He couldn't forget the way she had humiliated him in front of everyone, the way she had laughed at him with such cruel amusement. Yet there was something different in her demeanor now. She wasn't just there to observe, she was listening, learning, and even challenging some of the biases she had once so proudly upheld. One afternoon, after a particularly heated discussion about the lack of inclusivity in the school's curriculum, Karen approached Logan again. She was shifting nervously, her fingers twitching as she hesitated before speaking. "Logan," she started, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, "can I talk to you?" Logan sighed, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "I guess." She glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. "Not here. Can we walk for a bit?" Logan hesitated, then nodded. They stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the sounds of students laughing and talking fading behind them as they walked toward the empty part of the campus. Karen remained quiet for a long time, as if she was searching for the right words. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something." Logan raised an eyebrow. She swallowed hard, then spoke so quietly he almost didn't hear her. I think I might be like you." Logan stopped walking. "What?" Karen turned to face him, her eyes filled with something he never thought he'd see from her: fear. "I don't know how to explain it," she admitted. I felt wrong for as long as I can remember. I always thought that if I tried hard enough, I'd eventually feel comfortable as I am. But it never worked." Logan stared at her, his mind racing. Was this real? Was this some kind of joke? But as he looked at her trembling hands, the way she was struggling to get the words out, he knew she was being honest. Karen bit her lip, her eyes darting away. "When I saw you that day in class, when I laughed, it wasn't because I hated you. It was because I saw myself in you, and it terrified me." Logan took a slow breath, processing everything she had just said. He had never imagined this possibility, never once thought that Karen's cruelty might have been rooted in something other than simple bigotry. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. Logan crossed his arms, his voice careful. "Have you talked to anyone about this?" She shook her head. "No one would understand. My parents, they wouldn't accept it. And everyone at school? They only know me as the person I pretended to be." Logan felt a pang of sympathy despite himself. He knew what it was like to be afraid, to feel like no one would ever truly see you for who you were. But that didn't erase the past. "That doesn't excuse what you did to me." Karen flinched. "I know. And I'm not asking for forgiveness." "I didn't know who else to talk to." Logan was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I don't know what's going on in your head, but if you're serious about this, you need to start being honest with yourself. That's the first step." Karen nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I don't even know where to start." Logan thought about the support he had received, the people who had helped him along the way. Maybe start by talking to someone who understands. There are people who can help. Karen looked at him, a glimmer of hope in her expression. "Would you help me?" Logan hesitated. After everything, was he really willing to do this? Could he? Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, I can help." For the first time, Karen smiled. Not a smirk, not a mask, but a real, genuine smile. "Thank you." And in that moment, Logan realized that maybe, just maybe, people could change. Over the next few weeks, Logan found himself in an unexpected position, guiding Karen through the first steps of self-discovery. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when resentment flared inside him, memories of her laughter and the sting of her words. But there was also something undeniable about the way she was trying, the way she was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be herself. Karen had never been vulnerable before, and it showed in the way she hesitated to ask questions, the way she flinched at her own uncertainty. Logan saw shades of himself in her, the way he had once struggled to find the right words, the right identity. He directed her to online resources, encouraged her to read stories from people who had gone through similar journeys, and even convinced her to attend a local LGBTQ+ support group, though she refused to speak during the first meeting. At school, Karen remained guarded. Though she no longer made cruel comments or openly laughed at others, she still carried the weight of her past reputation. Some of her old friends noticed the shift in her behavior and questioned it. "What's up with you lately?" One of them, a girl named Melissa, asked during lunch. "You're acting weird." First, you're all buddy-buddy with Logan and now you're, like, quiet all the time. Karen tensed, glancing at Logan, who sat a few seats away. He didn't intervene. This was something Karen had to handle on her own. I'm just thinking about things differently now, Karen replied, her voice steady but careful. Melissa scoffed. Since when do you think? You used to be fun. Karen clenched her jaw. Maybe you just liked me better when I was mean. Melissa rolled her eyes. Whatever. You're acting like a freak now. Before Karen could respond, Logan stood up. Come on, he said, nodding toward the exit. You don't need to sit here. Karen hesitated but then followed him out of the cafeteria. As they walked down the hall, she exhaled sharply. That felt awful. Logan gave her a side glance. Yeah, but you handled it. Karen let out a bitter chuckle. Barely. They stopped near the lockers, and Karen leaned against the cool metal, running a hand through her hair. It's weird, she admitted. I spent so long making fun of people like you. People like me, I guess, because I thought it would make me feel better. It never did. And now that I'm trying to change, I feel lost. Logan crossed his arms. That's normal. Change isn't easy. Karen let out a shaky breath. How do you do it? How do you deal with all of this, knowing people will always have something to say about you? Logan thought for a moment. I focus on the people who actually care about me. The ones who see me for who I am, not who they expect me to be. Karen nodded slowly. I don't have many of those people. You will, Logan assured her. But you have to keep going. And you have to be okay with the fact that some people will never accept you. Karen stared down at her hands. That's the hardest part. Logan didn't sugarcoat it. Yeah. But it gets easier. Karen let out a breath and nodded. I hope so. Their conversation was cut short when the principal's voice echoed through the hallway over the intercom. Logan Harris, please report to the main office immediately. Logan exchanged a confused glance with Karen. What now? He muttered. As he made his way to the office, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Something was off. And when he stepped inside and saw his father sitting there, his expression unreadable, Logan knew that whatever was about to happen next would change everything. Logan swallowed hard as he stepped into the office, his father's presence immediately setting off alarm bells in his mind. Dr. Hayes sat in one of the chairs across from the principal's desk, his face unreadable, his hands clasped together in his lap. Principal Phillips stood beside him, arms crossed, an odd mix of sympathy and concern in his expression. What's going on? Logan asked, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. Dr. Hayes gestured for him to sit. Logan hesitated for a second before lowering himself into the chair beside his father. Principal Phillips cleared his throat. Logan, we wanted to inform you that Ms. Daniels will not be returning to Maplewood High. Logan blinked, not sure he had heard correctly. Wait, she's gone? Like for good? Dr. Hayes nodded. After multiple complaints and a formal review by the school board, they determined that she had created an unsafe learning environment for multiple students. She was given the option to resign rather than be fired. Logan sat back in his chair, trying to process it. He had spent so long dealing with Karen's cruelty, her sneering remarks, her constant microaggressions. And now she was just gone. Principal Phillips sighed. I know this might feel sudden, but I want you to know that your courage in speaking up played a big part in making the school a better place. Not just for you, but for others who might have been too afraid to come forward. Logan didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure what he felt. Relief? Justice? Maybe even a little sadness, not for the version of Karen who had tormented him, but for the person she might have been if she had been allowed to figure herself out sooner. What about the Diversity Council? Logan asked after a moment. Dr. Hayes smiled. It's going to continue. In fact, they're looking at expanding it, making it a permanent part of the school's culture. That, at least, felt like a victory. A real, tangible change. Logan exhaled. Dr. Hayes studied him carefully. How do you feel? Logan considered it for a moment. I don't know. I guess I thought it would feel bigger. But I just feel like it's over. Dr. Hayes nodded, as if he understood exactly what Logan meant. Sometimes change happens quietly, but that doesn't mean it's not important. The meeting wrapped up soon after, and Logan left the office feeling oddly weightless, as if a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying had finally been lifted. As he walked down the hallway, Karen was waiting for him near the lockers. Her face was unreadable. "I heard." Logan nodded. "Yeah." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Karen exhaled. "I guess I deserved this." Logan didn't argue with her. "What are you going to do?" Karen let out a humorless laugh. "I have no idea." Logan studied her for a second before speaking. "You should figure it out." Karen glanced at him, something unspoken passing between them. "Yeah," she murmured. "I guess I should." She turned to walk away, and Logan didn't stop her. He wasn't sure if they would ever be friends, if he would ever be able to fully forgive her, but he did know one thing: he had changed something. Maybe it wasn't the whole world, but it was enough. As he walked toward his next class, Sophia caught up with him, grinning. "So, the witch is gone." Logan chuckled. "Yeah. And you? How do you feel?" He thought about it for a second, then shrugged. "Lighter." Sophia nudged him playfully. "That's a good sign." And for the first time in a long time, Logan truly believed that it was.